Marcus wiped down another table at the Crystal Spire restaurant, his human hands moving in practiced circles across the gleaming surface. The establishment floated 3,000 feet above New Centauri Prime, offering spectacular views of the planet's twin suns through floor-to-ceiling windows. Most patrons came here to see and be seen, their alien forms draped in expensive fabrics that shimmered under the artificial lighting. As the only human employee in the restaurant, Marcus had grown used to the stares. Some were curious, others dismissive. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having joined only 50 years ago. Most aliens saw them as primitive newcomers who had stumbled into space travel through sheer luck rather than true advancement. Marcus didn't mind the looks anymore. The job paid well enough to support his younger sister's medical treatments back on Earth, and the tips from wealthy alien customers were generous when they bothered to acknowledge his existence at all. The evening shift was winding down when the commotion started near the private dining alcoves. Marcus heard raised voices speaking in the clicking, musical language of the Saurian Empire. He glanced over to see a group of tall, reptilian beings gathered around one of the most exclusive tables in the restaurant. At the center of the group sat Emperor ZSS Thak himself, his golden scales catching the light as he gestured emphatically with clawed hands. The Emperor rarely visited establishments like this, preferring the safety of his imperial palace. His presence had sent the restaurant staff into a frenzy of preparation earlier that evening. Marcus couldn't understand the Saurian language, but the Emperor's body language suggested extreme distress. Other patrons in nearby tables were beginning to notice the disruption, their conversations dying down as they turned to observe the scene. Restaurant manager Veltar, a six-armed hexapod, scuttled over to Marcus on his multiple legs. His compound eyes reflected worry as he spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Marcus, trouble with Imperial Party. Stay away from that section." Emperor very upset about something. Marcus nodded and continued clearing tables, but kept glancing toward the Imperial alcove. The Emperor's distress seemed to be growing worse, and several of his guards were speaking rapidly into communication devices. That's when Marcus heard it. A sound that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a blade. It was high-pitched, almost like crying, but with an otherworldly quality that made his chest tighten. The sound was coming from somewhere near the Emperor's table. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Marcus watched as the Emperor suddenly stood, his massive frame towering over his companions. The reptilian ruler was scanning the restaurant frantically, his large golden eyes filled with something Marcus had never seen in a Saurian before: fear. "Where is she?" The Emperor's voice boomed across the restaurant in accented Standard Galactic. "Where is my daughter?" The entire restaurant fell silent. Even the kitchen staff stopped their clattering to listen. Emperor ZSS Thak had a daughter? Marcus had never heard of any Imperial children in the news feeds. The crying sound came again, fainter now, but still audible. It seemed to be coming from somewhere below the main dining level. Marcus realized with growing alarm that it might be coming from the service areas beneath the restaurant. Manager Veltar was trying to calm the Emperor, his multiple arms gesturing peacefully, but the massive Saurian was having none of it. Imperial guards were spreading throughout the restaurant, their energy weapons drawn as they began searching every corner. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. While the guards focused on the main dining areas and the other staff cowered behind the service counter, he slipped quietly toward the maintenance access that led to the restaurant's lower levels. The service areas beneath the Crystal Spire were a maze of storage rooms, environmental controls, and garbage processing units. The artificial gravity was lighter here, and the sound dampeners weren't as effective. As Marcus descended the narrow stairs, the crying became much clearer. He followed the sound through dimly lit corridors, past humming machinery and stacked supply containers. The crying was definitely coming from something young, something in distress. Marcus had helped care for his baby sister years ago, and this sound triggered the same protective instincts. The trail led him to the waste processing section, where the restaurant's garbage was sorted and prepared for disposal. The smell was unpleasant, but Marcus pressed on. The crying was very close now. Behind a large recycling unit, Marcus found the source of the sound. His breath caught in his throat as he saw what was huddled in the shadows. It was a baby dragon. Not the mythical creatures from Earth's ancient stories, but a genuine saurian hatchling. She was no larger than a house cat, with scales that shifted between silver and deep purple in the dim light. Her tiny wings were barely developed, and her large eyes were bright with tears that caught the overhead lighting like jewels. The little dragon was trapped inside a maintenance cage that someone had clearly forced her into. The metal bars were bent in places where she had tried to escape, and her tiny claws were scratched from her efforts. She looked up at Marcus with those enormous eyes and let out another heartbroken cry. Marcus felt anger surge through him. Someone had deliberately taken the Emperor's daughter and hidden her down here like garbage. The cage wasn't even designed for living creatures. It was meant for containing malfunctioning equipment. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said softly, kneeling down beside the cage. "It's okay. I'm going to get you out of here." The baby dragon stopped crying and tilted her head, studying Marcus with curious intelligence. Saurian hatchlings were known to be highly intelligent from birth, unlike many other species that required years of development. Marcus examined the cage lock. It was a simple electronic mechanism designed to keep maintenance workers out of dangerous areas. He pulled out his employee access card and swiped it against the lock sensor. After a moment, the lock clicked open. The little dragon didn't immediately come out. She watched Marcus carefully, as if trying to determine whether he was trustworthy. Marcus had read that saurian young could sense emotions and intentions to some degree, a survival trait that helped them identify threats. "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus said, keeping his voice gentle. "Your father is very worried. He's looking for you." At the mention of her father, the little dragon's eyes brightened. She took a tentative step toward the cage opening, then another. Finally, she emerged completely and looked up at Marcus expectantly. Marcus wasn't sure what to do next. He couldn't exactly pick up an imperial princess, even one in miniature form. But the little dragon solved that problem herself by climbing up onto his outstretched hand with surprising agility. She was much lighter than Marcus had expected, and her scales felt warm against his skin. She settled into his palm and looked up at him with what he could only describe as trust. For a moment, Marcus was overwhelmed by the responsibility he now carried. This tiny creature was not just any saurian hatchling. She was the daughter of one of the galaxy's most powerful rulers. The sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the service corridors reminded Marcus that the guards were searching for the princess. He needed to get her back to her father quickly and safely. Marcus made his way back through the maze of service corridors, the little dragon perched calmly in his hands. She seemed to understand that he was helping her, occasionally making soft chirping sounds that were much more pleasant than her earlier distressed cries. As they reached the stairs leading back to the main restaurant level, Marcus could hear the chaos continuing above. The Emperor's voice boomed occasionally, demanding updates from his guards. Other voices were arguing about search procedures and security protocols. Marcus climbed the stairs carefully, making sure not to jostle his tiny passenger. The little dragon was looking around with bright curiosity, her fear apparently forgotten now that she was free from the cage. When Marcus emerged into the main dining area, the scene was even more chaotic than when he had left. Imperial guards were questioning every member of the restaurant staff, while other patrons huddled at their tables looking frightened. Emperor ZSS Thax stood in the center of it all, his golden scales darker with stress and worry. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he called out clearly. The entire restaurant fell silent. Every head turned toward Marcus, and he suddenly felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon him. The Emperor's massive head swiveled in his direction, and Marcus saw hope flicker in those golden orbs. "I found your daughter," Marcus said simply, raising his hands to show the little dragon. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Emperor ZSS Thak let out a sound that was part roar, part sob, and rushed toward Marcus with surprising speed for such a large being. The Imperial guards raised their weapons reflexively, then lowered them when they saw what Marcus was carrying. "SS Eslia," the Emperor breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "My little star." The baby dragon heard her father's voice and immediately began making excited chirping sounds, her tiny wings fluttering with joy. She looked between Marcus and her father, as if asking permission to go to the Emperor. Marcus carefully extended his hands toward the Emperor. She was trapped in a maintenance cage in the service levels, he explained. Someone had put her there deliberately. Emperor Zsthak's expression shifted from relief to cold fury as he processed Marcus's words. Someone had kidnapped his daughter and hidden her like refuse in the bowels of the restaurant. The implications were staggering. But, in that moment, the Emperor's focus was entirely on his daughter. He gently scooped the little dragon from Marcus's hands, his massive claws somehow delicate enough not to harm her. The baby dragon immediately crawled up his arm to perch on his shoulder, nuzzling against his neck with obvious affection. "Thank you," the Emperor said, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked at Marcus. "You have returned my most precious treasure." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks under the intensity of the Emperor's gaze. "Anyone would have done the same, Your Majesty." She was scared and needed help. The Emperor's golden eyes studied Marcus for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Not anyone. My guards searched everywhere except where you found her. Not anyone would have thought to look in such a place, or to venture there alone to investigate strange sounds." The little dragon chirped again and looked down at Marcus from her perch on her father's shoulder. To Marcus's surprise, she extended one tiny claw toward him, as if reaching out. "She likes you," Emperor Zsthak observed, and there was something like wonder in his voice. Saurian young are not typically comfortable with other species. They can sense intent and emotion, and few aliens feel genuine warmth toward us. Marcus looked up at the little dragon and smiled. "She's beautiful, Your Majesty, and very brave. She was trying to break out of that cage when I found her." The Emperor's expression softened further. "Yes, she is brave, like her mother was." A shadow passed over his features, and Marcus realized that the Empress was likely deceased. The Emperor was raising his daughter alone. Around them, the restaurant remained silent. Staff and patrons alike watched the exchange with fascination. A human waiter had not only found the missing imperial princess, but was being personally thanked by Emperor Zsthak himself. Such a thing was unprecedented. Manager Veltar approached cautiously, his multiple arms ringing with nervousness. "Your Majesty, we are investigating how this could have happened in our establishment. We will find those responsible." The Emperor's gaze shifted to the hexapod manager, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Yes, you will. And when you do, they will face imperial justice." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Someone infiltrated this restaurant with the specific intent to harm my daughter. This was not a random crime." The implications sent murmurs through the gathered crowd. An assassination attempt on imperial family was an act of war against the Saurian Empire. The political ramifications could reshape the entire sector. But Marcus was watching the little dragon, who had curled up against her father's neck and was beginning to fall asleep. The stress of her ordeal was catching up with her, and she looked like any tired child seeking comfort from a parent. "She should rest," Marcus said quietly. "She's been through a lot today." Emperor Zsthak nodded, his expression gentle as he looked at his sleeping daughter. "You are right. The investigation can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I need to ensure she feels safe again." The Emperor looked back at Marcus, and his next words surprised everyone in the restaurant. "I would like to speak with you privately, Marcus of Earth. Will you join me in my transport?" The request was stunning. No common citizen, especially not a human waiter, had ever been invited aboard an imperial transport. Marcus felt every eye in the restaurant fixed on him, but all he could think about was the tiny dragon sleeping peacefully on her father's shoulder. "I would be honored, Your Majesty," Marcus replied. The Emperor nodded and gestured to his guards, who immediately began forming a protective escort. As they prepared to leave, Emperor Zsthak paused and looked back at Marcus. "You saved more than just my daughter tonight," he said quietly. "You may have saved the future of our empire. Sslia is my only heir. Without her—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. The Saurian Empire would have been thrown into chaos without a clear successor. As they walked toward the restaurant's exit, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He had simply responded to the sound of someone in distress, following the same instincts that made him help his neighbors back on Earth. But, apparently, that simple act of kindness had far greater implications than he could have imagined. The little dragon stirred on her father's shoulder and opened one sleepy-eyed to look at Marcus. For just a moment, her scales shimmered with what looked like gratitude before she settled back into sleep. Marcus realized that his life had just changed forever. He had no idea what the Emperor wanted to discuss, but whatever it was, it would likely determine not just his own future, but possibly the relationship between humanity and the Saurian Empire. As they stepped onto the Imperial transport, Marcus caught a glimpse of the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, was Earth and his sister who needed her medical treatments. He had taken this job to support her, never imagining it would lead to this moment. The transport's doors closed behind them, and Marcus found himself in the most luxurious environment he had ever experienced. But all he could focus on was the sleeping baby dragon and her father's golden eyes, which seemed to see something in Marcus that even he didn't fully understand yet. The Emperor gestured to a comfortable chair facing his own. "Please sit. We have much to discuss, and the journey to the palace will give us privacy." As Marcus settled into the impossibly soft chair, he wondered what possible interest the ruler of one of the galaxy's most powerful empires could have in a human waiter. But as the little dragon chirped softly in her sleep, he began to suspect that his act of simple kindness had revealed something about humanity that the Emperor found intriguing. The transport lifted off into the star-filled night, carrying Marcus toward a conversation that would change everything he thought he knew about his place in the galaxy. The Imperial Palace rose from the heart of New Centauri Prime like a mountain of crystalline towers and golden spires. Marcus pressed his face to the transport's viewport as they approached, marveling at the structure's impossible architecture. The building seemed to defy gravity, with sections that floated independently while connected by bridges of pure energy. Emperor ZSS Thak noticed Marcus's awe and allowed himself a small smile. "The palace was built by my ancestors using technology that even we struggle to fully understand now. Each tower represents one of the great houses of our empire, and the central spire houses the imperial family." Little Princess SSS Leah had awakened during the journey and was now perched on her father's forearm, watching Marcus with bright, intelligent eyes. She had grown more comfortable with the human's presence, occasionally making soft chirping sounds when he looked in her direction. "She's trying to talk to you," the Emperor explained. "Saurian hatchlings develop language skills rapidly, but she's still too young for complex communication. The chirping is her way of expressing curiosity and affection." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest at the thought that this remarkable little creature had taken a liking to him. "She's extraordinary, Your Majesty." "How old is she?" 43 days, the Emperor replied, his voice filled with paternal pride. "In human terms, that would be equivalent to perhaps 6 months. Saurian development is accelerated compared to most species, but she is still very much a child." The transport docked at a private landing platform high on one of the floating towers. As they disembarked, Marcus was struck by the opulence surrounding him. Every surface gleamed with precious metals and gems, and holographic displays showed scenes from across the Saurian Empire's vast territories. Imperial servants, all of them Saurians of various subspecies, bowed deeply as the Emperor passed. Marcus noticed that they regarded him with curious glances, but showed no hostility. If the Emperor had brought him here, that was endorsement enough. "Your Majesty," a tall Saurian in elaborate robes approached them. His scales were deep blue with silver markings that indicated high rank. "The Council has been informed of tonight's incident. They are requesting an immediate briefing." Emperor ZSS Thak's expression darkened. "Tell the Council that the briefing will wait until morning. Tonight, my daughter needs rest and security." He paused, then added, "And I have important matters to discuss with our guest." The blue-scaled official's eyes widened slightly as he noticed Marcus for the first time. "Of course, Your Majesty. Shall I prepare quarters for the human?" "Yes, the finest guest suite available." The Emperor's tone brooked no argument. "Marcus of Earth is to be treated with the same respect you would show an ambassador." As they walked through corridors that seemed to stretch for miles, little SSS Leah began chirping more frequently. She was looking around at familiar surroundings, clearly happy to be home. When they passed other Saurians, she would chirp at them too, as if announcing her safe return. She's telling everyone about her adventure. The Emperor translated with obvious amusement. And about the brave human who rescued her. They eventually reached the Emperor's private chambers, a vast suite that occupied an entire floor of the central spire. The rooms were decorated with artifacts from across the galaxy. But what caught Marcus's attention were the holographic displays showing images of Princess Leia at various stages of her young life. "Please, make yourself comfortable," the Emperor said, settling into a chair that seemed to be grown from a single massive crystal. Princess Leia immediately climbed down and began exploring the familiar space, chattering happily to herself. Marcus chose a smaller chair nearby, still uncertain about the proper protocol. "Your Majesty, I'm honored to be here, but I'm not sure why you wanted to speak with me privately. I just did what anyone would do." The Emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. "That is precisely why I wanted to speak with you, Marcus. You keep saying anyone would do the same, but that is not true. Let me tell you what actually happened tonight." The Emperor activated a holographic display that showed the Crystal Spire restaurant from multiple angles. "My security team has already conducted a preliminary investigation. The kidnapping was carried out by agents working for House Veldar, one of our political rivals who oppose my policies toward younger species like humanity." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Political rivals? You mean this was about more than just kidnapping the princess?" "Much more." The Emperor's voice grew grave. "House Veldar has been pushing for a return to the old ways, when the Saurian Empire dominated lesser species through force rather than cooperation. They see my attempts to build alliances with races like humanity as weakness." The holographic display shifted to show the restaurant's service levels. The kidnappers chose their hiding place carefully. It was the one location that my guards, trained in traditional Saurian thinking, would never consider searching. "We think of waste and service areas as beneath our notice, places where nothing of value could be found." Marcus began to understand. "But I went there because I heard her crying and followed the sound." "Exactly." The Emperor stood and began pacing, his large form moving with surprising grace. A Saurian would have assumed the crying was coming from the main levels and searched there. Most other species would have deferred to the Imperial Guards and not acted independently. But you, a human, followed your instincts and investigated personally. Princess Leia had wandered over to Marcus during this conversation and was now climbing onto his lap with the casual confidence of a child who had decided she liked someone. Marcus gently supported her as she settled in, marveling at how trusting she was. "Your species fascinates me, Marcus," the Emperor continued. "Humans have been part of the galactic community for only 50 years, yet you've already proven yourselves in ways that surprise everyone. You show compassion toward other species without expecting anything in return. You act on moral instincts even when it might be dangerous or unrewarding." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. "We're not special, Your Majesty. We just try to do what's right." The Emperor stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "That is what makes you special. Do you know how many species would have rescued my daughter if they found her, but only after calculating what reward they might receive? Do you know how many would have seen a Saurian hatchling in distress and simply walked away because it's not their problem? I know I don't. Most of them." The Emperor's voice was heavy with old disappointment. "The galaxy is full of species that care only for their own kind. They cooperate when it benefits them and ignore suffering when it doesn't. But humans seem to have this unusual trait of helping others simply because they need help." Princess Leia chirped softly and looked up at Marcus with sleepy eyes. Without thinking, Marcus gently stroked her tiny head with one finger, and she purred with contentment. The Emperor watched this interaction with growing wonder. She has never allowed a non-Saurian to touch her before tonight. Even among our own species, she is selective about who she trusts. Yet she treats you like— He paused, searching for the right words, "like family." "Maybe she just knows I helped her," Marcus suggested. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she senses something in your emotional aura that resonates with Saurian young." The Emperor returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. "Marcus, I want to share something with you that I have never told any non-Saurian. When Leia was born, our Imperial seers performed the traditional reading of her future. Marcus felt a tingle of anticipation. Saurian seers were legendary throughout the galaxy for their ability to glimpse possible futures, though their predictions were notoriously difficult to interpret. They told me that my daughter's fate would be intertwined with a small kindness from an unexpected source. For months, I wondered what that could mean. Tonight, I think I understand. The Emperor stood and walked to one of the large windows overlooking the city. House Veldar and others like them believe that showing kindness to lesser species is weakness. They think cooperation makes us vulnerable. But you saved my daughter, and through her, potentially saved our empire from civil war. I don't understand, Marcus said, though Princess Sslia was beginning to fall asleep in his lap, apparently finding his presence comforting. If something had happened to Sslia, if she had died in that cage, the Emperor's voice tightened with emotion. I have no other heirs. The succession would have been contested between the great houses. House Veldar would have used the chaos to seize power and return us to the old ways of conquest and domination. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Your Majesty, I had no idea. I just heard someone crying and went to help. And that is precisely my point. The Emperor turned back to face him, his golden eyes blazing with intensity. You acted from pure compassion, without thought of reward or consequence. That kind of moral courage is rare in the galaxy, Marcus. Rare and precious. The Emperor moved to another display, this one showing star charts of the galactic sector. I have been trying to build a new kind of empire, one based on cooperation rather than conquest. But many of my own people resist this vision. They see kindness as weakness and cooperation as surrender. But tonight, a human waiter proved them wrong. You showed that strength comes from caring about others, that true courage lies in helping those who cannot help themselves. And, my daughter, the future Empress, will grow up knowing that her life was saved by someone who expected nothing in return. Princess Sslia stirred in Marcus's lap and made a soft, contented sound. She was clearly comfortable and safe, a dramatic change from the terrified creature he had found in the cage just hours ago. What will happen to the kidnappers? Marcus asked. The Emperor's expression grew cold. They will face trial according to imperial law. Attempting to harm the imperial heir is treason of the highest order. But, more importantly, we will root out the entire conspiracy. House Veldar has overplayed their hand, and they will pay the price. And what about me? Marcus hesitated before asking. I need to get back to work. I have responsibilities. The Emperor's severe expression melted into something approaching warmth. Marcus of Earth, after what you have done tonight, do you really think you can simply return to waiting tables? Before Marcus could respond, the Emperor activated another holographic display. This one showed official documents covered in Saurian script. I am offering you a position as Special Advisor on Human Affairs. You would help bridge the gap between our species and serve as an example of the cooperation I want to build. Marcus's heart raced. The opportunity was incredible, but, Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm just a waiter. I don't know anything about politics or diplomacy. You know about compassion. You know about doing what's right regardless of the cost. Those qualities are far more valuable than political training. The Emperor paused. And there would be substantial compensation. Enough to ensure your sister receives the best medical care available anywhere in the galaxy. Marcus felt his breath catch. How did you know about my sister? I make it my business to know about those who serve in establishments I visit. Your employment record shows the medical bills you've been paying. The Emperor's voice was gentle. You took a job serving aliens you'd never met to support family you couldn't be with. That speaks to your character. Princess Sslia opened her eyes and looked up at Marcus, as if sensing the importance of the moment. She chirped softly and reached up to touch his chin with one tiny claw. She wants you to stay, the Emperor translated. And so do I. The galaxy needs more people like you, Marcus. People who see suffering and act to end it, regardless of species or politics or personal risk. Marcus looked down at the little dragon in his lap, then up at her father. The decision that had started with following the sound of someone in distress had led him to this moment. This choice that could change not just his life, but potentially the future of human-Saurian relations. If I accept, Marcus said carefully, Would I be able to visit Earth regularly? To see my sister? Of course. And she would be welcome here as well, once her treatments are complete. The Emperor smiled. I think SSS Liao would enjoy having another young being around. She gets lonely sometimes in the palace. As if understanding the conversation, Princess SSS Liao chirped enthusiastically and nuzzled against Marcus's hand. Marcus made his decision. Then, yes, Your Majesty. I would be honored to accept your offer. The Emperor's smile widened, revealing sharp teeth that somehow didn't seem threatening. Excellent. We will make the announcement tomorrow, after the council has been briefed on tonight's events. I suspect there will be some resistance from the traditional faction, but he glanced at his daughter, who was chattering happily to herself. I think SSS Lia's endorsement will carry significant weight. Over the next several hours, as the palace staff prepared accommodations, and the Emperor explained more about Marcus's new role, one thing became increasingly clear. The little dragon had indeed chosen her new friend. She refused to leave Marcus's side, following him around the suite and chattering at him in her developing language. She's telling you about all her favorite things. The Emperor explained as Princess Sslia led Marcus to a window overlooking the palace gardens. The crystal formations she likes to climb, the holographic stories she enjoys, the treats the kitchen staff makes for her. Marcus watched the tiny creature with growing affection. She was incredibly intelligent for her age, already showing problem-solving skills and emotional sophistication that amazed him. Your Majesty, Marcus said as they settled in for the evening. What will this mean for humanity? I mean, if I'm representing my species. The Emperor considered the question seriously. It means that humans will be seen in a new light throughout the Empire. No longer as primitive newcomers, but as valuable allies with unique strengths. Other species will take notice of how I treat your people. That's a lot of responsibility. Yes, it is. But you've already proven you can handle responsibility, Marcus. You saved the future of our empire because you heard someone crying and decided to help. The Emperor looked at his daughter, who had finally fallen asleep curled up in Marcus's lap like a cat. And I think you'll find that the rewards are worth the effort. As the night wore on and the palace settled into quiet, Marcus found himself reflecting on the incredible turn his life had taken. That morning, he had been a waiter struggling to make ends meet. Now he was an advisor to one of the galaxy's most powerful rulers, trusted with the care of the future empress. But, more than that, he had apparently become an example of something larger. The Emperor spoke of compassion and cooperation as if they were revolutionary concepts. Yet to Marcus they seemed like basic human decency. Perhaps that was humanity's gift to the galaxy, he thought as he carefully adjusted Princess Slia's sleeping position. Not advanced technology or military might, but simply the willingness to help others without calculating the cost. The little dragon stirred in her sleep and made a soft, content sound. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, political complications, and responsibilities Marcus had never imagined. But tonight, he was simply a person who had helped someone in need, and that someone trusted him enough to sleep peacefully in his care. As Marcus looked out at the stars visible through the palace windows, he thought about his sister back on Earth and the message he would send her in the morning. She wouldn't believe the story, but she would understand the most important part. Her brother had found a way to help not just her, but potentially all of humanity. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt truly hopeful. The sound of a child's distress had led him to this moment, and now that same child slept peacefully in his lap, trusting him completely. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness really could change the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the night Marcus first heard Princess Lia crying in the depths of the Crystal Spire restaurant. The Galactic Council chambers on Centauri Prime buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of species gathered for what many considered the most important session in recent memory. Marcus adjusted his new diplomatic robes, still somewhat uncomfortable with the elaborate garments that marked his status as special advisor on human affairs to the Saurian Empire. The fabric was woven with threads of precious metal that caught the light as he moved, a far cry from the simple waiter's uniform he had worn such a short time ago. Beside him, Princess Liao perched on a specially designed platform that allowed her to observe the proceedings. She had grown considerably in 6 months, now roughly the size of a large dog, with scales that had deepened to a rich purple-silver that marked her as imperial bloodline. Her intelligence had developed even more rapidly, and she could now hold complex conversations in several languages. "Marcus," she said in her crystalline voice, speaking in standard galactic so the other delegates could understand. "Why do the Zephyrian representatives keep staring at us with those cold eyes?" Marcus followed her gaze to the section where the tall, gray-skinned Zephyrians sat in rigid formation. Their leader, Ambassador Krillthak, had been one of the most vocal opponents of the new Human-Saurian alliance that had formed following the kidnapping incident. "They're concerned about changes in the galactic power structure," Marcus explained quietly. "Some species prefer the old ways of doing things. The old ways where strong species dominated weak ones." Sislia's voice carried a note of disapproval that was startling in one so young. "Father has taught me about those times. They were not good times." Emperor Zsthak rose from his position at the head of the Saurian delegation, his golden scales gleaming under the chamber's lights. The massive reptilian leader commanded attention simply by standing, his presence filling the vast space. "Honored delegates," the emperor began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the chamber. "We gather today to discuss the proposal for expanded cooperation protocols between the established galactic powers and younger species seeking full membership." A ripple of unease passed through several delegations. The younger species in question included humanity, along with 3 other races that had joined the galactic community within the last century. The traditional powers had always maintained strict hierarchies that kept newer species in subordinate roles. "The Saurian Empire has seen firsthand the benefits of true cooperation," Emperor Zsthak continued. "Our human allies have brought fresh perspectives and innovative solutions to challenges that have stymied us for generations." Ambassador Krillthak stood, his tall form angular and intimidating. "Your Majesty speaks of benefits, but what we have seen is the erosion of traditional authority structures. The younger species lack the wisdom that comes from millennia of experience." Marcus felt Princess Sislia stiffen beside him. Even at her young age, she understood insults directed at those she cared about. "With respect, Ambassador," Marcus stood to respond. "The Zephyrian Empire's wisdom includes 3 major conflicts in the past 1,000 years, 2 trade collapses, and the subjugation of 7 species that only gained their freedom through Galactic Council intervention." A shocked silence filled the chamber. For a human to directly challenge a senior ambassador was unprecedented. But Marcus had spent 6 months learning galactic politics and history, and the facts were irrefutable. Ambassador Krillthak's gray skin flushed darker with anger. "How dare a primitive species question our record? Humans have been in space for barely a century. And, in that century," Princess Sislia spoke up, her young voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "humans have started 0 wars, conquered 0 planets, and enslaved 0 species. Their record speaks for itself." The impact of the young princess speaking in defense of humanity sent waves of surprise through the assembled delegates. Saurian royalty rarely spoke at council sessions, and never in support of non-Saurian species. The Corvalian delegation leader, a massive insectoid being with compound eyes that reflected the chamber's lights, clicked his mandibles in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "The young princess raises an interesting point," the Corvalian said. "Perhaps we should examine specific examples rather than speak in generalities." Emperor Zsthak nodded approvingly. "An excellent suggestion. Marcus of Earth, would you present the case studies we have prepared?" Marcus activated the holographic display system that dominated the center of the chamber. The first image showed a space station in obvious distress, its hull breached and power systems failing. 3 months ago, a Corvalian mining station suffered catastrophic system failures in the outer rim, Marcus began. The station housed 3,000 workers from 7 different species. The nearest rescue ships were Zephyrian vessels, estimated arrival time 4 days. The image shifted to show sleek human ships approaching the damaged station. Human merchant vessels in the area immediately diverted to assist, despite having no legal obligation to do so. They arrived within 6 hours and, evacuated all personnel before the station's life support failed completely. Ambassador Krilthak remained standing. Any species would have provided aid in such circumstances. Actually, no. Princess SS Eslia interjected with the brutal honesty of youth. The station logs show that 17 different ships detected the distress signal. Only the human vessels responded immediately. The others requested authorization from their governments first. Marcus continued with more examples. Human medical ships providing free treatment to refugee populations. Human engineers sharing advanced terraforming techniques with struggling colonies. Human diplomats mediating disputes between species that had been enemies for centuries. In each case, Marcus concluded, humans acted based on need rather than political calculation. They helped because help was needed. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates conferred among themselves. The traditional powers were clearly disturbed by the implications of Marcus's presentation, while the younger species seemed energized. Ambassador Krilthak raised his voice above the noise. These examples prove nothing except that humans are naive. In a galaxy full of competitors and threats, such altruism is a luxury that leads to weakness. Is that what you call it when someone saves your daughter's life? Emperor ZSS Thak's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Naivety. The Emperor moved to stand beside Marcus and Princess SS Eslia. Marcus of Earth risked his own safety to rescue my child from those who would have used her death to plunge our empire into civil war. He asked for nothing in return. He expected nothing in return. He acted purely from compassion. The Emperor's golden eyes blazed as he continued. That single act of naivety prevented a war that would have consumed half the sector and cost millions of lives. Tell me, Ambassador Krilthak, what strategic calculation could have achieved the same result? Princess SS Eslia climbed down from her platform and walked to stand next to Marcus, her young form dwarfed by the adults around her, but her presence commanding attention. I want to tell you all something, she said, her voice steady despite her age. When I was trapped in that cage, scared and alone, I could sense the emotions of everyone who came near. The guards who searched felt duty, but not compassion. The restaurant staff felt fear, but not concern for me personally. She looked up at Marcus with obvious affection. But when Marcus found me, what I sensed was pure kindness. He was upset that someone small and helpless was suffering. He didn't know who I was, didn't know what reward he might receive. He just knew that someone needed help. The young princess turned to address the full chamber. That is what humans bring to our galaxy. Not just technology or resources, but the simple understanding that suffering matters, regardless of who is suffering. The silence that followed her words was profound. Marcus felt a surge of pride, not just in the remarkable young being who had become like a daughter to him, but in the species she was defending. The Andromedan delegate, a crystalline being whose form shimmered with internal light, spoke for the first time. The princess speaks wisdom beyond her years. Perhaps it is time we considered what we can learn from our newest neighbors, rather than what we can teach them. Over the next several hours, the debate continued, but the tone had shifted dramatically. Princess SS Eslia's testimony, combined with the documented examples of human assistance, had forced even the most traditional delegates to acknowledge that the newer species brought value beyond simple labor or resources. When the final vote was called, the measure passed by a substantial margin. The younger species would be granted full council membership with equal voting rights and representation. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out, Ambassador Krilthak approached the Saurian delegation. His expression was grudging, but respectful. Your Majesty, he said formally, the Zephyrian Empire may not agree with all of your policies, but we acknowledge the wisdom of your words today. He turned to Marcus, and we acknowledge that our assessment of human capabilities may have been incomplete. Finally, he looked down at Princess SS Eslia. Your Highness spoke with remarkable insight for one so young. Your father is training you well. After the ambassador departed, Princess SS Eslia looked up at Marcus with sparkling eyes. Did we win? Marcus knelt down to her level. We didn't win anything, SS Eslia. We just helped everyone understand each other better. Which is the same thing. Emperor ZSS Thak observed with amusement. In diplomacy, understanding is victory. That evening, As they returned to the imperial palace, Princess Esleya peppered Marcus with questions about what would happen next. The young dragon's curiosity was insatiable, and her questions often revealed insights that amazed the adults around her. "Marcus," she said as they watched the sunset from the palace's highest balcony, "do you think other species will start acting more like humans now?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I don't think they need to act like us, Esleya. Every species has something valuable to contribute. The important thing is that we all remember to care about each other. Father says that caring about others is what makes someone truly strong," she observed. "Is that why you're not afraid of the big, scary ambassadors?" Marcus laughed. "I'm definitely afraid of the big, scary ambassadors. But being afraid doesn't mean you can't do what's right. That's what courage is," Princess Esleya said matter-of-factly. "Father taught me that too." Emperor Zss joined them on the balcony, his massive form somehow managing to move silently. "What has my daughter been teaching you today, Marcus?" "That wisdom and age don't always go together," Marcus replied, earning a delighted chirp from Princess Esleya. "She has had an excellent teacher in that regard," the emperor said, settling onto a bench designed to accommodate his size. "Speaking of teaching, I have received communications from several other species requesting human advisors for their governments." Marcus felt a mix of pride and apprehension. "That's wonderful, but I hope they understand that I'm just one person. I can't represent all of humanity." "Of course not," Princess Esleya said seriously. "But you can show them what humans are like when they're being their best selves. That's what you showed us." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself busier than ever. The Council's decision had opened new possibilities for cooperation between species, and everyone wanted to understand how to work effectively with humans. He established an exchange program that brought young humans to serve in various alien governments while alien scholars studied on Earth. He helped draft new trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. He mediated disputes using principles of empathy and understanding that were becoming known as the human approach. But, perhaps most importantly, he continued to serve as Princess Esleya's primary tutor in interspecies relations. The young dragon was already showing remarkable diplomatic instincts, and everyone agreed that her future reign would likely be very different from traditional Saurian emperorship. "She's going to change the galaxy," Marcus told his sister during one of their regular video calls to Earth. "Not through conquest or intimidation, but through understanding and cooperation." "Just like someone else I know," his sister replied with a smile. Her medical treatments were progressing well, funded by Marcus's generous imperial salary, and she was expected to make a full recovery. "I just listened when someone needed help," Marcus protested. "Exactly. And look what that led to." As Marcus ended the call and returned to his duties, he reflected on how much had changed since that night in the restaurant. A simple act of compassion had not only saved a child's life, but had altered the political landscape of the galaxy. Princess Esleya found him in his office, as she often did when she wanted to discuss something important. She was growing so quickly now that she would soon be too large for his lap, but she still enjoyed curling up next to his chair while they talked. "Marcus," she said thoughtfully, "I've been reading about Earth history. Humans have wars and conflicts just like other species." "That's true," Marcus admitted. "We're not perfect, Esleya. We make mistakes, and sometimes let fear or anger guide our decisions. But you also have something most species don't," she continued. "You have stories about heroes who save people they've never met. You have words like stranger and kindness that mean the same thing to you. You teach your children to help others even when it's hard." Marcus was quiet for a moment, struck by her insight. "I suppose we do. That's why Father chose you," Princess Esleya said confidently. "Not because you're perfect, but because you try to be good even when it's difficult." Looking at the remarkable young being who had become such an important part of his life, Marcus realized that she was right. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their adaptability, but their persistent belief that things could be better, that people could be kinder, that differences could be bridges rather than walls. "You know what?" Marcus said, gently stroking Princess Esleya's scales as she settled in for an afternoon nap. "I think you're going to be an amazing empress someday." "I hope so," she murmured sleepily. I want to build the kind of galaxy where everyone feels safe to cry for help, because they know someone will always come running. As Marcus watched over the sleeping princess, he thought about that night 6 months ago when he had followed the sound of someone in distress into the depths of a restaurant. He had been just a waiter then, struggling to make ends meet and support his family. Now he was an advisor, a teacher, and something like an uncle to the future ruler of one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. But, more than that, he had helped prove that humanity had something valuable to offer the galactic community, the simple belief that everyone deserved kindness, regardless of their species or status. The little dragon who had once been trapped and terrified was now safe, loved, and learning to become the kind of leader who would extend that same safety and love to others. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could echo across the stars, changing not just individual lives but the course of history itself. Outside the palace windows, ships from dozens of different species moved through the sky in peaceful harmony, their crews working together on missions of exploration, trade, and mutual aid. It was a sight that would have been impossible just months before, but which was becoming more common every day. The sound of a child crying had led to this new future, and Marcus knew that as long as there were people willing to listen and help, that future would continue to grow brighter. Princess Leia stirred in her sleep and murmured something in ancient Saurian that roughly translated to safe home. Marcus smiled and continued his work, knowing that he had helped create exactly that, a galaxy where everyone could feel safe enough to call for help and trust enough to offer it freely in return.